Hello there, and welcome along to the What If podcast presented by Suicide Prevention Scotland. Over 4 episodes, we've been meeting some brilliant people to have big conversations about suicide, helping to bring what can feel like a really difficult thing out into the open. We're with people like myself who may have lost someone, and others who have their own experiences of suicidal thoughts. I'm Amy, and today we are thinking about suicide and society. Many of our systems don't work well for people. You know, things like the local swimming pool shut but there's no funding for repairs, or energy bills being through the roof, or maybe you're struggling to access day-to-day mental health support, or finding that just getting a doctor's appointment feels like climbing Everest. As we know, many people spend more time on social media as well than in real life, with lots of studies showing us that young people are more likely to feel lonely. So many things around us may have an impact on our ability to live the life we would want. This episode isn't about pointing fingers, but we will ask what needs to change so we can live better. To help unpick this, we have a brilliant panel. So to dig into all of this and how we can try and do the things to live the life that we want, we have a fantastic panel to unpick it all. We've got Paul Stevenson, who's a mental health advocate who received a late-stage diagnosis of Tourette syndrome, ADHD, OCD and sensory processing disorder. Paul, you might have seen him, he's featured extensively across UK and international media, telling his own personal story, having attempted suicide and sadly has lost a number of friends in this way. We're also joined by Martin Melly, who is Operations Manager at Men Matter Scotland, who support over 500 people at their hub every single week. And I know, Martin, you bring your own experience of suicidal ideation as well. And you do provide mental health support at building sites across the UK as well. So we'll hear more about that. And last but not least, we have Lorraine McGrath, who is CEO at Simon Community Scotland. And they are the largest provider of homelessness services across Scotland. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the podcast. I'm going to come to you first of all, Martin. I mentioned Men Matter, the fact that you help over 500 men every single week. Can you tell us just about the service that you run and why it's so important?
Yeah, no problem. So Men Matter Scotland is a men's mental health and suicide prevention charity. We've been going 6 years now. We've got a hub based in Drumchapel, where, as you say, we support guys. Any man living in Scotland over the age of 16 is welcome to come along. All the support we do is free of charge. And what we try to do is we're open from Monday to Friday, and then we do activities at the weekend. So the hub's open Monday to Friday, and what we have within that is we put on mental health and wellbeing activities and classes for the guys to hopefully understand why they think and feel the way they do, how to move forward, and give them positive coping strategies and get them in an environment where they're connecting with other people and crucially talking about what's going on in their lives and understanding that they're not the only person that's feeling maybe the way they do, and hopefully we can see guys progress from there.
Why was it so important for you to get involved in this line of work? I know you've experienced suicidal ideation yourself.
So I struggled with mental health around 8 years ago. There was a number of circumstances in my life that came up sort of one by one, all within a short time frame. And I'm a big football fan, so I go and support my team. And I was in a full football stadium. I'll not mention how many people were in it because they'll be able to work out what team I support. But I was in a full football stadium and I felt like the loneliest guy in the world. I felt like I was the only person going through what I was going, and it wasn't until I changed what I was doing in my life and started talking about what was going on, started getting help, started getting support, that I realised I wasn't the only person going through it. So when I did get through what I was going through, got out of depression, I had a look back and thought, I don't want MD to feel the way I did. Mm-hmm. So that is why I work at Men Matter Scotland.
And vital work that you're doing. I know there'll be so many people that are grateful for what you do every single week. Paul, I could see you nodding there, just relating to a lot of what Martin said. You've experienced your own suicidal ideation. You've lost a number of friends. Mm-hmm. How have you handled all of that?
I think I'm from that generation where if you got the courage to speak up, it fell on deaf ears. I remember, I don't want to bash the NHS at all here, but the actual mental health crisis team was called the Back Clinic. So there was stigma attached to anything like that. So personally, I went 6 days asking for help and support, and got told the fact that I were asking for help and support, that was just a cry for help. You want to be here, and I didn't get any support. So as a consequence, circumstances went that way. And I think, looking back, it might be the last bit of strength and courage that someone's got that brings them forward. And this is why I'm happy things are changing and things are improving, because, to actually take someone seriously, to, as Martin said, to communicate, and someone to talk to, and somebody will hear your voice. So
I know it's so important, Lorraine, when we're thinking about that. I mean, Paul's just talking about just that generational shift and the fact that years ago it would have been seen as it's a cry for help and what do you expect us to do about it? How important is it that we have systems, whether it's services, whether we're talking about the NHS, doctors, public service, the charitable sector, how important is it that we do connect all of these things and listen to people and take them seriously when they say that they're feeling suicidal?
It's always been really important that the system responds to the person, and not just in that moment and the problem that they're turning up with in that moment, but actually see the person behind that problem. But increasingly, we have a system that is shifting gear up to only the most extreme response in the most extreme circumstances. And that makes it more and more difficult for people to get access to help. If we look at the people we support at Simon Community Scotland, we work with about 12,000 people a year now, and most of them have multiple issues in their lives and multiple challenges in their lives, all of which contribute to them being in a really, really difficult place. But for every single one of those people, if we track back their story, there was opportunity after opportunity for the system to respond and intervene. And if they hadn't seen just as a problem at that point, but they had been seen as a person and the system responded with compassion, then many of them might not be experiencing homelessness or any kind of chronic homelessness, and they might not be in any way as at risk as they are now of being at increased risk of losing their life through suicide and other factors.
So there's multiple points of possible intervention. I mean, because the stats around homeless people and suicide are 9 times more likely to die by suicide if you're homeless.
Yep, 9 times more likely. We know that drug-related harm deaths are increasing year on year. At the moment, 7% are noted as intentional. Around 10% of homelessness deaths are noted as probably intentional. But we know that the most pervasive issue in people experiencing homelessness long term is hopelessness and helplessness, and what we would term as deaths by despair all too often result. Now, whether or not you're ever able to point to that and say that was intentional or unintentional, but when someone leaves no value in their life and they behave so recklessly that they are experiencing multiple high-risk situations and non-fatal incidences that could have been fatal if someone hadn't been there to intervene, it kind of points to a high-risk endeavour. And we know that the people that find themselves in chronic homelessness occupy an awful lot of high prevalence across all of the high-risk areas of suicide. And the key factor is that point about, someone to listen, someone to care, someone to see a person, not just a problem, or not to apply a kind of commonplace methodology to it. If you're asking for help, then you know that you don't really want to do it. Let's hope that that's not a common response now. But what we do know is a common response is extreme stigma. So if you have a drug-related problem or drug-related issue or an addiction to anything, whether that's gambling harms, which we know is an increased high risk as well, then the stigma that people experience is extreme, and you'll see an awful lot of that.
Yeah, nobody wants to wake up one day and decide I'm going to be an addict. There's pain behind that, so we don't really need to fix the addiction. Well, they need support with that. It's the pain you need to get behind, and like you're saying as well, Lorraine, about that hopelessness. For me, in my experience, I don't really think MD wants to die. I just don't think they want to live the way they're living. And what we try and do at Men Matter is show guys, like, you've got yourself and you've got pain. What one do you want to die? It's going to be the pain. And if we can try and fix that, help them, support them with that, then people will feel hopeful instead of hopeless.
And that, Paul, can't it can be really, it can be really hard to feel something that does make you feel hopeful, that you can hold on to at times, can't it? Especially if you can't see the help, if you don't have a support network around you, it can be really difficult for some people.
I think the problem is that I felt worthless, and people viewed me as worthless. I don't think that connection, and I don't think people really understand how close you are to being in a position like that. You know, you've got a house, you've got a mortgage, you've got children, and I was maybe about 2 or 3 steps, and I'd become homeless, and I felt worthless, and I knew when I spoke to people, I felt less of a person when I was talking to people, and I just wish that the key thing is to people to get that connection, not to look down on something. The only reason why you should be looking down is to help them up, not to look and then move on. And I think a lot of times, especially in the workplace, when we've got issues going on, I mentioned earlier when we were talking before, when I was 17, I got skin cancer on the back of my leg. And my boss then said, Paul, take your time off as much as you need, get yourself right and come back to work. But then when I was in my late 30s, 40s and I was working as a doorman, I was stood on the door with my boss and I just started crying. And I know I was depressed and had mental health issues, but I didn't know I got ADHD. I didn't know I had Tourette syndrome. And he looked down at me and he went, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know. He said, P45's in post. And that were it, gone. But both those two situations could possibly have been life-threatening. And that's changing that narrative for people to understand that. So, and as I was saying, in the workplace, a lot of problems, first, it goes to the line manager. And a lot of line managers at work aren't really educated or trained to deal with this. So I think, we need to be putting things in place that, the first port of call, these people have an understanding or know where to signpost. I think that's really important moving forward.
Because there's that internal stigma that you can feel, isn't there? I mean, I'd lost my partner to suicide and then felt suicidal myself shortly after, but it was the same thing. I remember really struggling to open up and tell somebody that's how I was feeling. And I remember it was exactly the same thing that somebody said to me. It was, if you had something physically wrong with you, you wouldn't think twice about taking the time off that you need. So don't feel like you're letting people down if you need time off for your mental health. But Martin, it's hard to shift that internal stigma as well, that somebody can feel like a failure, or they feel like they're letting their family down or their friends down, whoever, if they open up and speak about needing help.
Yeah, and it's a stigma that's long been attached. I feel it is getting better, but we've still got a long, long way to go. And even if somebody comes in, or a family person, they're maybe, if they've got a partner, they've got 2 kids, they're maybe 3rd, 4th, 5th down their priority list. And once you start putting other people ahead of yourself, and then something else comes up, you fall so far down that list that you forget to look after yourself. And how can you look after anybody else if you're not even putting yourself on par with them? You have to bring yourself back up level with them and be the best you can be, so you can look after everybody else. But kind of feels like we're taught in society, put everybody else first and we don't matter as much. And then once you start convincing yourself of that, it's easy to reaffirm that, and you need to try and work your way back and put yourself up at a higher standard than that, because everybody's worthy, everybody deserves to be loved, but a lot of time we don't love ourselves, we love everybody else. And how can you expect other people to love you if you can't even love yourself?
I know, I could not agree more, Martin, honestly. And Lorraine, I'm going to guess that you'll see a lot of that at the Simon community, and you've been there for 13 years. The amount of people that must just feel worthless. They must really struggle to find that hope. How do you help them find that?
That's a big question. That's a really big question. But yes, we see an awful lot of people who don't just feel worthless, they loathe themselves. They have learned to loathe themselves and loathe the life that they have and the experience. we work with an awful lot of women. A lot of our accommodation services are specialist for women, and 80% of them have experienced child removal at the hand of the system, and the impact of that is enormous. We know that the risk of suicide and the risk of death by suicide goes up massively in that first 12 months after child removal, and it's not an area that anybody talks about. So how do you help a woman find a sense of purpose and identity and self-love again after just one single experience of that, and that's in the context of multiple trauma. Just about all of them have experienced massive levels of violence, gender-based violence, and abuse as well, of at horrific levels. And too often that is then accompanied by addiction issues as a result. Most of them will describe that as self-management. It's the small things. It's actually making sure that absolutely everything that person says is listened to and responded to, that we don't have this magic wand that we can fix anybody, but here's how to understand better what your life experiences has done to you, and how you think about things, and how you process information, how you make decisions, and how you make choices, and help each and every person kind of get to a place where they understand why they behave in the way that they do sometimes, why they make the choices that they make, that it's not a choice, it's something that's happening in their makeup and their psychological makeup that's actually driving them down that road that feels like a safe place to go, but actually isn't. That's not the safest place.
And like Lorraine says, if, like you said, people loathe themselves, if they hate themselves, then they don't value themselves. So anytime something goes wrong, they don't feel worthy of asking for support, of asking for help. And a lot of time they convince themselves that they're a burden on people. But I hear the word burden quite a lot, and I always ask people, has anybody ever called you a burden? And most of the time, 99% of the time, it's no. It's something we convince ourselves because we don't like ourselves, we feel we're not worthy enough, we feel we're not worthy of love, and then you feel you're a burden on people, on the people that care about you. And people always talk about suicide being a selfish act, but if somebody thinks they're a burden and they're ruining people's lives by being here, surely it's not selfish for them to try and take themselves out of that equation. So I think the stigma around that has to change. And Lorraine's like, if you hate yourself, it's going to be very difficult to then move yourself up and get yourself going. But what we try to do is get people to change how they think. If they can change how they think, they can change how they feel. If you hate yourself and you feel badly about yourself, you're going to feel negatively. If you can try and switch that round slowly, it's not a quick fix or anything like that, but slowly but surely, if you can change that round, start to feel more positive, you'll see the positive in life.
So I'm going to say something you said earlier on about getting somebody who's addicted, got addictions, dealing with that problem first, when really the problem, dealing with the thoughts of suicide, is the thing, because it's like putting your finger on a leaking pipe, hoping that that's going to repair it. It's not going to. It's going to stop temporarily, stop it, but it's going to start again. And I don't know. I think people need to have a bit more respect and understanding. You mentioned before that it's not like a lifestyle choice. People don't choose to be on the street, to be addicted to some substance. They're in this circumstance, and like I said before, can happen so fast and take people unawares.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're in that depth of distress and despair, and the one thing that takes you away from that is a substance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can understand why.
Yeah.
It's so easy to judge
Yeah.
and see that as a choice, but actually it's not much of a choice. It's the only way to cope.
I've got to say I've been guilty of that prior to what happened to me. I used to look at people and think, I'm maybe better than them. Why are they doing this? Why aren't they doing that? And then once you're in that position yourself, and I think that's what everybody needs to understand, that everybody could fall foul to, mental health, and, they're not, it doesn't make you any better. They're no better than who I am. They're a human being like I am. And I think if they can understand that and grasp that, then they'll stop looking down at people, which I stopped. I mean, I was in a big, big, deep hole, and I was trying to get out of it, but I was just going round and round in circles, and the hole was getting deeper and deeper, and I could see less light and less opportunity.
And it's that kind of vicious circle that I've seen firsthand and experienced of, you'll turn to something to try and ease the pain, which then, as you say, Martin, makes you feel that kind of self-loathing and feel worse, and then you just keep going back round. And it's, as you said, trying to change the way that you think. And I know I sit here as somebody who's been very lucky and has had therapy and paid for counselling myself after going through a loss of my partner through suicide. But this is a big question. What could we be doing as a society to try and reduce those risks? Like, what could we actually be doing to try and avoid people and getting to that point of feeling utterly hopeless and feeling like they've got nothing else?
So I think one of the points I'd want to make is that there's always a person in every story where someone has made that better decision to find help or to move forward. There's always a person, there's always a relationship. And it's about saying that every single one person in the system has the opportunity to be that person if they see a person with hope and potential rather than a problem at the time. Because I think the biggest challenge that the people we support face is system stigma. It's not even the societal stigma, it's going to an NHS service and being refused a service or being dismissed because they do have an addiction, an active addiction or a history of addiction, being refused because they're not extreme enough or bad enough to need a service right now, being refused because maybe they don't behave, communicate and turn up and show up to use services in the same way as we expect the rest of everybody to do. Their ability to manage appointments, etc. So the system stigma that people experience, I think, is one of the biggest challenges. And that's where that point of, think about the relationship you have with that person in that moment. You could be the point of contact.
So it's individuals in the wider system that could be that person. They could be that little bit of hope, that one bit that could change the narrative for someone.
And we need to give permission to that. We don't just need to give permission to it, we need to switch it on and ramp up the power behind it to say, this is what matters. The way that you react in that moment, at that time, could be the difference. Like in Paul's case, almost the difference between life and death.
Yeah.
You could be that difference. And if you just show up with all your compassion that you show somebody else who has a physical condition or who doesn't have a history of addiction or who doesn't communicate in that particular way in that particular moment, if you just take a moment to think, if I can be the same with everybody, that I can be that difference.
Do you agree with that?
Oh,
Paul,
yeah.
do you think
yeah,
that
definitely.
we've got the power to be that difference to someone?
I think you look around and I've noticed more frequently seeing defibrillators about on the side for immediate action for somebody. And it's changing that narrative that this is a very serious, possible terminal position that they're in. I had a thought then, but in true ADHD style, oh no, it's brought it back to me now. When I mentioned ADHD, I was predisposed to addiction. And who I was as an individual, my brain was wired differently. So all my life I've collected negative labels, and I took those labels on. I believed them because I didn't understand what was wrong with me. And you've got 1,000 and thousands, well, it's like a washing machine on spin speed trying to look for that little red sock you've got in the whitewash, thinking that's the problem, but not being able to do it. So for me, my journey to recovery was being empowered, helping me getting a diagnosis for something that I had. ADHD isn't mental illness, but it manifests itself as that, because I remember doing a talk in a school, and I said, this guy put his hand up, said, when I were a lad, there were no such thing as ADHD or Tourette syndrome because my dad had a belt. And everybody went, oh, you can't say that. And I went, he's got a point. You can't beat these conditions out of a young person. You can beat them in, so they're deep down. I said, but then don't be surprised when we get into our 30s and 40s that we're going to be struggling with our mental health. And I think that, you know, that's what happened with me. So that empowerment led me on a journey of self-discovery, self-forgiveness. And it was the greatest gift I possibly could have had.
Because you were in your 40s, weren't you, when you got your various diagnoses? So do you think that's the one thing that we can do differently for the children and young people of today, is whether it is a diagnosis or just that early intervention that we're talking about, of getting those things right for the individual?
I mean, I don't want to change the subject onto like getting diagnosis and things like that, but we're grossly underfunded. So we've got a lot of people who go to a doctor saying, this is happening to me, that's happening to me. And there's no pathways for diagnosis. But we've got young people who need that support there and then, you know. So we have to get some sort of structure in whatever you go to your doctor for. Like for me, he said, oh, I've never met anybody with Tourette syndrome. And I said, oh, I've just started with it, but I'd had it all my life and it wasn't recognised. So we need more education in the you know, for the first port of call. You know, when you go to your doctors, what are these symptoms? What have you got going on in your life? Oh, I've got this going on in my life, that going on in my life. And I had a doctor say to me, well, I'd be depressed if I had all that going on with me. And I thought, well, that's a big help, thanks. So it's educating these people, these professionals more, but the job's falling on individuals like yourselves, you know, to get associations together and to start talking and an opening conversation. But it should be across the board, you know, in employment and in the medical fraternity.
Martin, what do you think? It's a big question, but what could we be doing differently?
Kind of following on from both what Lorraine said there. Listen, man. A lot of the times when I talk about guys a lot because more men matter, but when guys come in and what they'll do is they'll sit down. So when I started at Men Matter over 3 years ago, I didn't know too much about Alcoholics Anonymous. Fraser, I work alongside, told me a lot about it. So I went on Alcoholics Anonymous forum. It was fascinating. They told you the history of it, and then they chaired a meeting in it so you could see what it was like. And somebody said something in it that I thought, I'm just going to do that. So they said, when they first went to Alcoholics Anonymous, somebody told them, take the cotton wool out your ears and stick it in your mouth. And I thought, right, that's what I'll do at Men Matter. Guys will walk in and they've not been listened to, they've not been heard. So if you can just sit, where it's a guy, where it's somebody coming to your service, where it's yourself, Paul, if you can listen to them and genuinely and accept for what's going on with them and let them be heard. And that's something that can empower somebody to go, somebody's listening to me. Okay, I can make a start now. Whereas now, if, like you were talking about when addiction, if you go and try and get mental health support for addiction, we can't give you support because you're an addict. So you need to sort the addiction first, but it goes hand in hand. Where if we sat and listened to people, heard what they need, heard what they're lacking in their life, we can make a start there. And then somebody feels, I'm worthy of being listened to, and that's a start.
Is there a way, Lorraine, do you think, of joining any of this up? Because I think that's what you hear from a lot of people who've had that experience. It's they've maybe gone to their doctor, or they've ended up, in A&E, or they've maybe had some involvement with their work, but it can all feel quite disjointed. Is there a way of trying to join up that support, or is that wishful thinking, really?
Oh, there's always a way. And I think the golden thread that joins all of it up is compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And that still starts with self-compassion and being compassionate to yourself, which I think we're not as good at educating children on, and our young people on, actually, to learn how to be compassionate towards themselves, to really listen to themselves and really listen to other people as well and be compassionate. So I think there's more that we can do in terms of preparing people to be more compassionate and supporting them to be more compassionate. And it starts at a very young age, and it starts with self-compassion. But then I think it really is about really empowering each bit of the system. We know where the touch points in the system are that people engage with when they're at risk. We know we have lots of evidence and lots of understanding. For instance, before anybody's first experience of homelessness, we know that their engagement with the health system goes up quite significantly. because they're seeking help. Because
So we actually
because
have all those stats and
we
all
know
that
we
data.
we all have a
Yeah.
lot of data about
Mhm.
who's more at risk of suicide, who's more at risk of self-harm. Though all of those groups show up really heavily in homelessness, we know all of that, and we also know that being able to provide a connection to a positive relationship and to be treated with compassion can be one of those first moments of change in that person's life to start diminish that risk gently. We've got a programme of developing psychological safety. To be frank, we got a bit tired of trying to navigate the mental health system with and on behalf of people. So we took a bold step and employed our own clinical psychologist team and psychology assistants, not just to work directly with people and the problems that they were experiencing, but to help our staff be more compassionate. And we thought our staff think they're enormously compassionate, but actually it's that being able to apply frameworks, being able to understand more about why that person might be expressing that particular emotion or that distress or that past experience in the way that they are just now, and what's the very best way we can show up to show them that they matter. And I think that's the fundamental issue, is that
And it's that compassion. You
compassion.
speak of, and you can apply that. We can all apply that, and every
everybody.
bit of our system can apply that. Paul, what's the one thing, if somebody was watching this, what's one thing that you'd want them to take from your journey as somebody who's been there?
I'm going to jump in and actually talk about that. If somebody approaches you and starts a conversation, a lot of people are afraid to talk about suicide. They think it's going to, like we spoke about before, that the responsibility will be on us if something does happen. But we're there to listen. We're not there to fix them, because we're not trained. Personally, I'm not trained to do that. But the fact that someone, and it's about being kind and giving them that time of day. We generally always try and want to rescue people, don't we? Oh, what can I do? I can do this. I need to contact this person. But just listen. And listen, and then signpost or make other people aware of that. Because when you're in that position, you're not making sense of anything. Your life's chaotic. You'll end up in a place where how the heck have I got to this position now? And I just think kindness matters. We don't know what people have gone through. We don't know what experiences they've had in the past life. And you might not relate to them because of they might have an addiction or, on prescription meds or whatever meds there are. But just think, like, coming back to that's a human being, that's an individual. And at this moment in time, what can I do for that person? I can listen and show compassion.
That's been the word I've really taken from this, compassion, because it applies at a personal level, like what you were talking about, Martin, and that trying to find that within yourself and learning to love yourself, as you mentioned. What would you want somebody to take away from your experience?
For me, with Lorraine here and Paul here, you can take away all sorts of things. With Paul, I think it's the fact that the best person to try and help Paul is Paul. Somebody who's been through lived experience, what he's been through. And if we can get more services with that sort of thing, I think that'd be better. And I think with Simon Community, Men Matter, whoever it is, what we rely on a lot is signposting people. There is a lot of good help and support out there. It's just about getting the word out about it. And there is people that are compassionate and do want to help. The system, for me, is the last bit that needs fixed. The main bit that needs fixed. It needs people with lived experience in there. And I think it's a more education as well. Like you were talking about, you were lucky enough to go through therapy. I've been through counselling and CBT. CBT changed my life. And that was something that I didn't know my thought process. And that helped me understand it. So for me, if we could go back and go into schools and have counsellors and CBT therapists in schools, I think every child should have the ability to go and speak to somebody. And then if we can get people understanding why they think and feel the way they do earlier, I think it can set us on a good path.
And people are amazing. I mean, the three of us We'll meet people all the time that just astound us and what they've been able to overcome and their journey to recovery. They are amazing. And if that is one big message that I can send out there, is that I know there is not one person who's hopeless.
No.
Not one individual circumstance that cannot change and cannot be shifted into a better life, and for that person to find hope and ambition for the future. We see people all the time. We've got about a third of our workforce, when we employ over 300 people now, who have lived experience. And some of the people's stories is just astounding. And I'm sure Paul and Martin will be able to recount many the same. But I go back, it always goes back. In every one of those examples, there's always a person, a relationship, a connection, where they felt that person cared, that they felt that person listened. And that was the moment of change.
Well, thank you to you three for being 3 great examples of people who have done exactly that throughout all your work. Yeah.
Can I just say something? If someone's watching this and they've experienced it, they might not think people are interested in the story, but their story will resonate with somebody. And I mean, it's not easy to talk about what I've spoke about, but the fact that I'll go forward and speak about it, I invite other people, especially people who are, maybe who have influence, to come forward and say, well, actually, this has happened to me, that's happened to me. So for anybody from any walks of life, you've got a voice, use it and use it to support other people. Yeah,
we like to say, it may matter, our chairman's use this, so I steal this off him, but he says we recover loudly so others don't suffer in silence. And if everybody can have that message and see, look, there is other people out there struggling, but they got through it, and it gives you that hope, and that hope springs eternal.
Well, thank you. Honestly, from the bottom of my heart, you've been absolutely fantastic, and I know everything you've said will make a real difference to people who have been watching and listening to the podcast. So, Paul, Martin, Lorraine, thank you so much for joining us on What If.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to Paul, Martin and Lorraine for joining us today for a great discussion, just giving us so much to think about. Now, if you are worried about yourself or someone else, please know that support is available. You can find details in the show notes or visit our website, suicideprevention.scot. That's where you can get all the latest news and blogs from Suicide Prevention Scotland, including Sam, who's been writing about her experience of suicide prevention training as a deaf person. Also, the National Delivery Lead, Hayless, reflecting on the idea that it's okay to show that you're not okay and why it's fine just to have a cry sometimes. And we travel to Vienna for the annual World Congress on Suicide Prevention. To learn more about the experience with Marianne and Christina, you can check that out. We will see you soon for the 4th and final episode of the series. Bye for now.